Welcome to This Explainer. Let's explore God's boundless generosity, El-Akram, and what human nobility actually means.
Picture this. Caliph Harun al-Rashid, literally the most powerful ruler on earth, is dying of extreme thirst.
He famously admitted he'd trade exactly half of his entire global empire for just one glass.
Why? Well, the whole universe is essentially a giant mirror, perfectly reflecting God's majestic names. Everything around us, from the vast sky to our own human nature, points directly to the Creator.
So let's dive right into the ultimate name of generosity, El-Ekrem.
God's generosity is completely unlike ours. It's absolutely boundless and literally expects nothing in return.
We learn to give from what already exists, right? But God creates existence out of absolute nothingness.
You can actually witness this boundless generosity in something as simple as a glass of water. God unites flammable gases, moves them as clouds, drops rain, and safely stores it in mountains.
Think about it. It takes just 3 precisely balanced atoms to create the absolute foundation of life. And you know, this exact same divine generosity is deeply tied to human creation too. Take the word alaq. We aren't just biology. We're created fundamentally from profound divine love and connection.
This love is the ultimate act of El-Ekram, freely giving us existence and a higher purpose.
That's why the very first revelation commands us to read the universe as a beautifully connected whole.
Because we're made with this love, we possess a unique capacity for true nobility, called karamah.
Now, true miracles aren't about flying or walking on water. It's about living a steadfast moral life.
Birds fly and fish swim naturally. The real human miracle? Maintaining unwavering, upright moral integrity.
Like great scholars noted, true nobility simply means activating the deep piety already planted in our hearts.
So I'll leave you with this. Are you truly honoring the boundless generosity freely given to you?
Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a really fascinating lecture by the thinker Mustafa İslamoğlu. What we're doing today is taking these massive, highly abstract, cosmic theological concepts and grounding them, literally, in concrete, natural metaphors. We're going to look at the universe around us with a huge focus on water and see how it reflects some incredibly profound philosophical truths about absolute generosity and ultimately human dignity. Let's get into it. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the mirror of existence, move into defining the most generous, then dive into the metaphor of water, explore creation out of love, and finally wrap up with true human honor. Section 1, the mirror of existence. Okay, so right off the bat, the speaker puts forward this idea that the physical universe is definitely not just a bunch of random matter colliding out in space. Actually, it's a vast, deliberate signpost pointing directly to the divine. And the lecture uses this brilliant analogy to explain it. It points out that the divine is hidden from us, but not because it's shrouded in darkness. No, it's hidden by an overwhelming, blinding intensity of light. Think about trying to stare directly at the sun, right? You literally can't do it. It blinds you. To safely look at that kind of intense light, you need a mirror. So according to the speaker, this physical universe, the trees, the water, our own human experiences, that is the necessary mirror. It's what allows our human consciousness to actually observe and understand these massive divine attributes without being completely overwhelmed. Section 2, defining the most generous. The lecture really zeroes in on the Arabic term El-Ekrem. This translates to the absolute, limitless, and unconditional most generous. And the absolutely crucial point the speaker makes here is that this kind of generosity, it completely defies human comparison. When the divine gives, there's absolutely no counting. There are no limits, and it requires no tools. We're talking about generosity in its most absolute, pure, and unfiltered form. And the linguistic depth behind this is just fascinating. The source breaks down the distinct Arabic terms for forgiveness to really illustrate this. So you start with af, which is, forgiving someone, but giving them a stern warning not to do it again. It's still a little bit transactional. Then you step up to saf, where you silently just let it go without saying a single word. But the ultimate manifestation of this generosity is gaf, or maghfirat. This is where the act is completely wiped out. It's erased entirely from existence, to the point where the person being forgiven doesn't feel even a drop of shame. It is a profound, total psychological erasure of guilt, which sets up a really stark contrast. Think about it. Human generosity is usually pretty transactional. We kind of calculate our returns, right? We expect some gratitude, a favor down the line, maybe a little social credit. But divine generosity is completely boundless and expects absolutely nothing in return.
In fact, the speaker even frames human worship through this lens. The divine doesn't need our worship. It's actually prescribed entirely for our own human benefit. The giving is 100% one way.
Section 3. The metaphor of water. So how do we actually witness this absolute generosity in the real world? Well, this is where the abstract theology gets super concrete. The speaker takes us through the standard water cycle, but reframes it as this series of deliberate, generous miracles. Just look at the steps. Step 1. You have 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and they're miraculously given this almost magnetic attraction to bond together. Step 2. It generously changes its physical state into vapor, so it can actually rise up into the sky. Step 3. It travels precisely where it's needed across the globe as rain. Step 4. The Earth itself acts as a massive storage reservoir, holding it in mountains and fault lines even after violent stuff like earthquakes. And Step 5. It hits barren dirt, which, by the way, takes 300 years to form just 1 single centimeter, and it transforms it into a living paradise. It's just a breathtaking way to look at basic science. And to really drive home the immense value of this everyday generosity, the source drops this fantastic historical anecdote. Emperor Harun al-Rashid, who ruled this massive global empire, was once asked by a scholar what he would give for a single cup of water if he were dying of thirst in the middle of the desert. The emperor says, half my empire. Then the scholar says, okay, and if you drank it but couldn't excrete it, what would you give for the cure? The emperor replied, the other half. It brilliantly highlights how literally all worldly wealth is just utterly dwarfed by the simple, everyday, generous gift of water. Now, the source takes this water metaphor even further. The speaker references scientific experiments suggesting that water acts almost like a highly sensitive, living entity. The claim is that water actually reacts to human intent and speech. So it forms these beautiful, intricate crystals when it's exposed to positive, grateful words, and it physically degrades when exposed to negativity. Through this lens, the water we drink, and remember, water makes up 2/3 of our own bodies, is literally reflecting our own personal state of thankfulness or ingratitude right back at us. Section 4. Creation out of love. We get a massive linguistic redefinition here. The Arabic word alaq, which is found in the very first verses of Revelation, is traditionally translated as a blood clot or an embryo. But, drawing on ancient linguistics scholars like Ibn Faris, the speaker fundamentally redefines it as love, affection, and profound attachment. This is a huge paradigm shift. It means humanity wasn't just created out of cold biological mechanics, but literally forged out of divine love and affection. Building right on top of that, the famous first command, Iqra, which most of us know translates to read, is also completely reframed. The speaker explains that its root meaning, Istiqamah, actually means to gather, to connect, and to unify. So this command isn't just about reading words on a physical page. It's this profound cosmic directive to the human mind to connect the disparate dots of the universe, the water, the trees, your own life experiences, and unify them so you can see the much greater divine whole. Section 5. True human honor. So if we're created out of this profound, generous love, and our whole job is to read the universe, how are we supposed to actually live up to that? The speaker tackles the concept of karamat, which means human honor or a human miracle. And there is a massive contrast between what we tend to chase and what's actually real. A lot of people chase what the lecture calls false honor. Supernatural feats, claiming they can fly, walk on water, basically doing parlor tricks to prove they're special. The source takes a hard line against this. True honor, true karamat, is actually taqwa, which is deep mindfulness, and istiqamah, which means unwavering moral steadfastness and absolute integrity. The lecture frames this so perfectly. It says, do not look at someone flying in the air or walking on water. Flies fly and fish swim. Look instead at their steadfastness. I mean, wow. If you really want to see a human miracle, don't go looking for magic tricks. Look for the person who manages to maintain their moral compass and integrity day in and day out, in a world that is constantly testing them. That is the real miracle. Because we are inherently granted this incredible dignity right from the start, and yet it is so easily thrown away. The speaker points out that human dignity is profoundly squandered when we let ourselves become slaves to money, to worldly status, or to other people. Treating those fleeting, transactional things as our ultimate end goals, it's just a tragic, tragic waste of the elevated status we were freely given at creation. Which brings us to our final takeaway. The lecture concludes that true honor is already woven right into the fabric of your creation, very much like the hidden potential inside a single drop of water. But it has to be activated by your own mindfulness and your own integrity. So the question this explainer leaves you with is this: are you going to squander your inherent human honor on a transactional world, or are you going to step up and elevate it?
Imagine for a second that you are the absolute ruler of this vast global empire. Like, you have boundless wealth, you've got massive armies just waiting for your slightest command, sprawling palaces stretching across entire continents.
Right, the ultimate level of power.
Yeah, exactly. But right now, in this specific moment, you are stranded in the middle of a barren, scorching desert, and you are quite literally dying of thirst. The end is minutes away. Your organs are shutting down.
Oh, wow. That's a drastic shift.
It is, right. And in that terrifying final moment of pure desperation, what would you trade for? Just a single, completely ordinary glass of water.
You know, it sounds a bit like a hypothetical they'd throw at you in a Philosophy 101 class, but it actually cuts to the absolute core of how human beings measure value. Because, I mean, the instinct is to say you give up everything, obviously.
Save your life.
Exactly. But actually holding on to the reality of that trade, like trading a whole empire for some water, is incredibly difficult for the human mind to sustain once we're, back in the comfort of our daily routines.
Yeah, we forget so quickly. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a source text that essentially forces us to stay in the discomfort and clarity of that exact desert scenario. We're looking at this profoundly layered lecture by the scholar Mustafa İslamoğlu.
Yeah, it's a brilliant text.
It really is, and the entire lecture is dedicated to exploring the Islamic theological and philosophical concepts behind just one single divine name, which is Al-Akram. That translates to the most generous.
But we should probably clarify for the listener, right? Our mission today isn't just to, analyze a piece of theology.
Right, definitely not. We are exploring a complete radical paradigm shift. This text attempts to fundamentally restructure how you perceive the physical universe, how you define human dignity, and really how you understand the very mechanics of generosity itself.
Yeah, because the lecture takes these super familiar concepts, things we all think we understand, like giving or forgiving or even just, looking at a tree, and it turns them completely inside out.
Which is mind-bending. But to even approach this idea of ultimate generosity, the text first has to set up a framework, right? Like, how is human consciousness even supposed to interact with the immaterial?
Exactly. It introduces this concept of Esmâ, the divine names. And the text uses this very deliberate metaphor here. It describes these names as a rope extending from the divine throne straight down into our reality.
A rope. So, a rope implies a rescue, doesn't it? Or at least some kind of mechanism for climbing out of a hole.
Yeah, that's exactly the implication.
It suggests that our baseline state of consciousness is somehow, stuck. Like, we're trapped in a lower elevation in the material world, and we need something external to grab onto so we can pull our intellect up.
That's a perfect way to put it, because, the human mind is inextricably bound to the physical realm, right? We process reality through our biological hardware.
Our eyes, ears, that kind of thing.
Yeah, our neural pathways. They all evolved to interact with matter. So the text argues that because we are so deeply embedded in this physical limitation, we just can't grasp pure, infinite abstraction all on its own.
It's too big.
Right, too vast. So the Esmâ serves as these conceptual handholds. They translate the infinite characteristics of the Creator into concepts that the human intellect can actually grasp, internalize, and, like you said, use to pull itself upward.
Okay, so that sets up a really fascinating mechanical problem, which the text just dives straight into. Before we can even talk about the nature of divine generosity, we have to solve the basic physics of perception.
Yeah, the mechanics of how we see.
Right. How is a biologically limited human being supposed to perceive a limitless divine presence in a purely material world? Because clearly the Creator isn't just some physical object sitting in the sky that our optic nerves can, register.
Right, and the source offers an explanation for this hiddenness that directly contradicts what most people just assume.
Oh, totally. Because most people assume the immaterial is hidden because it's ethereal or ghostly or obscured by darkness. It's just too faint to see.
Exactly. But the text posits the exact opposite. It explains that the Creator is hidden from direct perception, not because of darkness, but because of the overwhelming absolute intensity of his manifestation. It's an intensity of presence that literally shatters the capacity of the perceiver.
Okay, let's unpack that because it's exactly like a solar eclipse. You know, you can't step outside and stare directly at the sun.
No, you'll go blind.
Exactly. If you try, the sheer magnitude of the energy, the raw radiation, it'll literally burn your retinas. You won't see the sun. You'll just destroy your capacity to see anything at all.
Right, you're blinded by an overdose of light, not darkness.
Yes. But if you take a piece of cardboard, poke a tiny pinhole in it, and project that intense light through the pinhole onto a piece of paper on the ground, you can safely study it. You can track the exact shape of the eclipse, watch the movements, and understand the whole phenomenon perfectly without, ruining your eyes.
That analogy maps so perfectly onto the framework Islamoglu is building here, the physical universe. So the galaxies, the Earth, our own physical bodies, that is the piece of paper.
Okay.
And the divine names, the Esmâ, act as the pinhole, or as the text calls them, mirrors. Because the biological eye would be obliterated by the direct source, these conceptual mirrors capture that intense divine light and reflect it down into the physical world.
So those reflections land on physical objects, on human interactions, on basically the events of our daily lives.
Exactly, meaning that human consciousness is entirely capable of perceiving the Creator, but only through the medium of the creation. The creation is the reflection in the mirror.
And this leads to what I think is one of the most vital assertions in the whole text. It says that every single thing in the universe is essentially a pointing finger.
Yes, I love that imagery.
Like a massive oak tree, a flowing river, the sound of someone laughing, the grief of someone crying, or even, a sudden financial windfall or a devastating loss. None of these things are ultimate realities in and of themselves.
No, they're not. They are all indicators. They are pointing fingers indicating the artist behind the art, the doer behind the action, the author behind the unfolding story.
But the psychological hurdle there is just massive. I mean, think about it. If you are standing in an art gallery pointing at a masterpiece on the wall, and I just stand there staring intensely at your fingernail, I'm entirely missing the point of what you're doing.
You're completely missing the masterpiece.
Exactly. And the text is suggesting that our default mode of moving through life is basically just staring at billions of fingers, completely oblivious to what they are actually directing our attention toward.
Yeah, and overcoming that default mode requires a major cognitive leap. The text frames this not just as a spiritual problem, but as an evolutionary intellectual one.
Right.
Acknowledging these reflections requires moving from concrete thinking to abstract thinking. The source actually posits a really interesting theory about the history of human belief here.
Oh, about idolatry, right?
Yeah. It argues that historical idolatry, the practice of carving statues out of stone or wood and worshiping them, that wasn't just a religious error. It was actually the symptom of a childish, premature human intellect.
It was a developmental bottleneck for the whole species. Early humans were just stuck in a concrete phase of cognitive development. It's so much like a toddler who hasn't developed object permanence yet.
That's a great comparison.
Right. A toddler needs to physically hold a wooden block to understand that it exists. These ancient societies just lacked the intellectual hardware to process an abstract, immaterial creator, so they dragged the concept down to their level.
Yeah, they chiseled it out of rock so they could physically touch it. They effectively confused the physical symbol for the infinite reality.
They trapped the infinite inside the finite because it was literally the only way they felt safe interacting with it. So abstract thinking, then, is presented as the actual maturation of the human mind.
Precisely. The ability to see the immaterial through the material, to look at a physical object and understand it's merely a reflection of a higher reality, that's the true evolution of consciousness.
And the text insists that this kind of knowledge has to precede faith or even denial. You can't meaningfully believe in or reject a paradigm that your brain hasn't even developed the cognitive capacity to understand yet.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, recognizing these signs prevents us from exploiting or misinterpreting the physical world around us.
Oh, that's such a good point.
I mean, if you look at a forest and only see concrete reality like board feet of timber, potential profit, your natural instinct is just to exploit it. The forest is just a mute, dead object.
Yeah, just raw material.
But if your mind makes that abstract leap and you view the forest as a mirror reflecting divine beauty, provision, ecological balance, then your relationship to it changes to one of reverence and stewardship. You don't want to smash the mirror.
Wow. Yeah, you don't want to smash the mirror. And the implications for our daily emotional reality are just as profound. The text argues that this specific kind of abstract understanding is the absolute root of the tree of faith.
Yes, and it categorizes this highest form of understanding as marifatullah, which means deep, intimate knowledge of God. The bold claim the author makes here is that without this underlying architectural knowledge of reality, true worship is basically impossible.
Because rote physical movements, or just reciting words, completely devoid of this cognitive mapping, they're just empty actions.
Exactly.
But, the text also mentions that as this knowledge deepens, the natural human reaction isn't just blind obedience, it's profound awe and wonder. It quotes a prayer of the Prophet Muhammad where he says, "Oh Lord, increase my wonder."
Yeah, it's a beautiful prayer.
It is, but I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener. I find this a little counterintuitive. Well, usually in human experience, knowledge destroys wonder. Think about a magic trick. When you finally figure out the mechanics of a magic trick, when you see the trapdoor and the mirrors under the table, the awe just instantly vanishes. You just say, oh, it's just a mechanical lever.
Right, the illusion is broken.
Yeah. So why would understanding the actual mechanics of the universe produce the opposite effect? Shouldn't we be less surprised, not more?
That's a really valid question. But the difference is that a magic trick relies on deception, right? The reality behind the illusion is always smaller, cheaper, and less impressive than the illusion itself.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
But the universe operates on the exact inverse principle. The deeper you look into the mechanics of reality, whether you're looking through quantum physics, biology, or theology, the more staggering and infinitely complex the reality actually becomes.
So the illusion is our mundane, surface-level view of life, and the reality is what's breathtaking.
Exactly. The text points to Ayatul Kursi, which is a central verse in the Quran, and it explicitly states that the Creator does not sleep, nor does slumber overtake him.
Like a system administrator who is literally never off the clock, never distracted, never dropping the ball.
Right. And when a human being internalizes that, not just as like a nice religious platitude, but as the fundamental physics of reality, their personal will begins to align perfectly with the divine will. The text uses this concept of Ram Olmak.
Ram Olmak. What does that translate to?
It's this profound yielding or submitting of one's own desires to the grand design. Internal conflict and anxiety vanish because you fundamentally trust the architecture of the system and you trust the character of the architect.
Okay, I struggle with that a bit too, because the idea of yielding to the universe and just letting anxiety vanish, it sounds uncomfortably close to toxic positivity to me.
I can see why you'd say that.
Right. I mean, if I lose my job, or if someone I love gets a terminal diagnosis, intellectualizing the grand design doesn't pay my rent or stop my grief. How does the text reconcile this abstract awe with very real, visceral human suffering? It's so easy to be in awe of the universe when you're looking at a beautiful sunset, but it's much harder when you are in agonizing pain.
The text actually anticipates that exact friction. It absolutely does not offer a sanitized, pain-free version of spirituality. To address the reality of suffering, the source examines the most devastating, agonizing day in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, which was the day he traveled to the city of Taif.
Right, and just for context for the listener, this was a period of extreme, unprecedented vulnerability for him. He had lost his primary protectors in Mecca, his wife and his uncle. He was facing literal existential threats, so he went to Taif seeking refuge and hoping to form an alliance.
He was looking for a lifeline.
Exactly. But instead of finding help, he was violently, brutally rejected. The leaders mocked him, and they literally set the townspeople on him. He was chased out of the city, pelted with stones until he was bleeding so profusely that his blood pooled in his shoes.
It's horrific.
It is. He collapsed in an orchard, completely alone, physically battered, and facing the absolute humiliating failure of his mission.
It is the absolute definition of rock bottom. And in that orchard, bleeding and exhausted, he makes a prayer. And this is exactly where the text anchors its definition of true knowledge and awe.
Because of what he asked for.
Yes. In that moment of sheer physical trauma and emotional devastation, his prayer was not a demand for the pain to stop. He didn't ask for a supernatural army to destroy Taif, and he didn't ask for a magical escape hatch to transport him back to safety.
So what does a person with ultimate marifatullah, ultimate knowledge of the system, ask for when the system is seemingly crushing them?
He poured out his grief, admitted his complete powerlessness, and then ended with a really specific, piercing plea. He asked that he not be abandoned to his own ego. He prayed, "Do not leave me to myself for even the blink of an eye."
Do not leave me to myself. Wow. He didn't ask to be removed from the suffering, he just asked not to be left alone in it.
What's fascinating here is that this distinction redefines ultimate comfort. True awe means realizing that the continuous presence of the Creator is the fundamental necessity of existence. It renders even severe physical hardship secondary.
He wasn't pretending the stones didn't hurt.
No, of course they hurt. But he was recognizing that being disconnected from the source of reality, being left to the chaotic, fragile devices of his own ego, that would be an agony far, far worse than physical trauma. The text notes a really profound asymmetry here too. God never leaves the human leaves God.
We sever the connection. We do it through our ego, our distractions, or by just letting our despair convince us that we are entirely alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maintaining that connection, realizing the Creator hasn't blinked or forgotten you even in the absolute chaos, that provides an anchor. It doesn't stop the storm, but it holds you steady so the storm doesn't tear you apart from the inside.
To yield to a system like that in the middle of a massive crisis, you have to be absolutely certain about the character of whoever is running the system. You aren't just trusting a cold, mechanical set of cosmic laws.
No, it has to be relational.
Right. And that brings us to the very core subject of this source text, understanding the specific nature of the Creator we are trusting. And this is encapsulated in the name Al-Akram, the most generous.
Yeah, and to unpack the real weight of Al-Akram, the text dives deep into ancient Arabic linguistics, starting with the root word karam.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
The etymology reveals how deeply tied to the physical environment these concepts were. You have to remember, ancient Arabic was birthed in a harsh, unforgiving desert landscape, so their vocabulary for morality was inextricably linked to survival and nature.
Right, because the physical metaphors always carry so much more weight than abstract definitions. Like, what did karam actually look like to a desert nomad?
Well, it wasn't just, handing someone a gold coin. Karam was used to describe a very specific meteorological phenomenon, a kirishabu. Yes, this is a heavy, dark, low-hanging cloud that actually opens up and brings life-sustaining rain to the parched earth. A white, fluffy cloud that passes overhead, casting a brief shadow but delivering absolutely no water, is completely devoid of karam. It offers the illusion of relief, but produces nothing.
A passing cloud is almost cruel, honestly. It gets your hopes up and then just abandons you. So karam inherently involves an action that produces tangible, life-giving relief.
Exactly. It is productive, undeniable abundance. The root is also applied to highly fertile, quality soil, like ground that takes a single seed and yields an abundant, entirely disproportionate crop. So in the natural world, karam equates to fertility, abundance, and genuine relief.
That paints such a clear picture.
It does. And then the text pivots to how this root translates into human morality. In the realm of human behavior, karam centers heavily on the concept of forgiving a wrongdoer.
Which makes perfect sense because in the landscape of human interaction, forgiveness is probably the rarest and most life-giving resource we have. I mean, it's so much easier to give away money than it is to give away your right to be angry when you've been deeply wronged.
Absolutely. The text actually breaks down 3 distinct Arabic words for forgiveness to illustrate the varying depths of human generosity. And it does this to set up a contrast with divine generosity.
Okay, let's go through those. What's the first tier?
The first tier is af. This is the baseline level of forgiveness. You choose not to punish the person who wronged you, but you do it with a caveat. It is conditional. You basically say, I am letting you off the hook this time, but I am watching you. Don't let it happen again.
Right, so you are holding on to the leverage. You grant them physical or social safety, but you maintain the power dynamic. The threat is still just hovering right over their head.
Exactly. Now, the second tier elevates the moral standard quite a bit. It is called saf. Saf means forgiving someone without the lecture. You don't scold them, you don't rub their nose in their failure, and most importantly, you do not embarrass them to their face.
Oh, wow.
You wipe the slate clean, and you spare them the humiliation of having to constantly acknowledge your graciousness.
That requires an immense amount of emotional regulation, to be genuinely wronged, to have every right to unleash your anger, but to actively choose to absorb that pain without making the other person feel small, I mean, that is incredibly difficult for the human ego.
It is, it's huge. But there is a third highest tier that is even more difficult. It is called ghafra or maghfira. This level of forgiveness is so absolute that it is almost entirely alien to human nature.
How so?
Ghafr means forgiving someone so completely and fundamentally that the person is never made to feel they even committed a crime in the first place. The offense isn't just forgiven, it is entirely erased from the record. It is hidden away so perfectly that not a single trace of shame remains.
It's the difference between crossing a word out with a pen, where you can still clearly see the mistake underneath the ink, and going back in time so the word was never written at all.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it.
And the text points out that when people asked God for maghfirah, they are essentially begging, do not just forgive me. Hide my mistake so thoroughly that you never remind me of it, don't let anyone else know about it, and treat me exactly as if I had never done it.
Right. Do not label me a forgiven sinner, treat me as if I never sinned. That is the essence of gaf. It is the ultimate manifestation of karam because it completely restores the dignity of the wrongdoer.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. There is a psychological layer to that which highlights how fundamentally different human generosity is from divine generosity. Even when humans attempt to reach that level of gaf, we almost always fail because we are neurologically wired to keep ledgers.
Oh, we love our ledgers.
We do. Even if it's subconscious, we track our giving. If I buy you dinner, some part of my brain registers a deficit that I expect you to fill later. We give to charity because we desire the social capital of being seen as a good person. Even in religious contexts, people often give solely because they are calculating a return on investment in the afterlife.
We are deeply transactional creatures. Our survival historically depended on reciprocal altruism, so we just naturally apply that physics to our morality.
But the nature of Al-Akram operates outside of transactional physics entirely. The text asserts that God creates out of nothing, giving purely for the sake of giving, because a being that lacks absolutely nothing cannot possibly need a return on investment. There is no ledger because there is no deficit to fill.
And this non-transactional nature is embedded in the very grammar of the word Al-Akram. The source provides a really crucial linguistic detail here. Al-Akram is not a standard adjective. Grammatically, it is an ism tafdil, which is a superlative.
Okay, a superlative.
But it is an absolute superlative, not a comparative one.
Meaning it doesn't just mean the most generous out of a certain group.
Exactly. When humans use superlatives, they're always relative. If we say a mountain is the highest, it only means anything in comparison to shorter mountains. But Al-Akram represents an absolute, unparalleled generosity that is entirely free from comparison.
Right.
The text specifically warns against the cognitive trap of trying to quantify this. It points out the childish mindset of asking questions like, is God's generosity bigger than the universe?
Because you can't put infinity on a scale next to a finite object. It just doesn't compute.
Precisely. Absolute greatness defies analogy. Al-Akram denotes a generosity that exists as a fundamental state of being, without equal, without bounds, without conditions, and completely without comparison to human stinginess or human giving.
If we are dealing with a creator whose very essence is this uncalculated, absolute, unparalleled generosity, it begs a massive historical question. Well, how did this absolute generosity first introduce itself to humanity? Like, if you are the most generous entity in existence, what is the very first thing you say to the creatures you've made?
Oh, right.
The text looks at the first revelation of the Quran to answer this, and the answer completely subverts expectations.
It really does. The very first command given to the Prophet Muhammad was a single word, Iqra, which is universally translated as read. But the historical context makes this fascinating because Muhammad was unlettered. He could not read or write physical text.
So, commanding an unlettered man to read ink on parchment is a paradox. It implies the command means something vastly more expansive than just basic literacy.
Exactly. And the text utilizes a profound linguistic interpretation to unlock this paradox. It links the etymology of Iqra to the word ijima. Ijima means to gather, to bring disparate fragments together into a cohesive whole. It basically means to synthesize, to connect the dots.
So Iqra wasn't a command to scan a book. It was an imperative to read reality itself.
Yes. It was an instruction to look at the scattered pieces of the physical world. So, the movement of the stars, the anatomy of a leaf, the events of history, the emotions in your own chest, and bring them together to see the underlying connections. And crucially, the full command is, read in the name of your Lord who created.
Right.
This isn't just secular scientific observation. It is synthesizing the data of the universe with the awareness of the artist behind the art. You're connecting the dots and recognizing that the resulting picture points directly back to the creator.
It fundamentally reframes what it means to be literate. And then the text dives into the verses that immediately follow that first command, which state that humans were created from alaq.
Yeah, alaq.
Now, in modern biology and common translations, alaq is often rendered as a clinging clot. or a leech-like substance, referring to the early stage of embryonic development. But the source pulls out classical Arabic dictionaries to reveal a completely different philosophical layer.
Yeah, and while the biological translation definitely captures the physical reality, the source argues it misses the deeper intent of the verse. In classical Arabic, the root of alaq denotes a necessary love, a deep, inherent affection or attachment of the heart. The text asserts that humanity was not merely constructed from biological material. Humanity was woven from love.
Woven from love?
Yeah. Divine affection is the primal, foundational ingredient of human existence.
Think about the magnitude of that paradigm shift for a second. The ultimate act of absolute generosity, Al-Akram, wasn't dropping a mountain of gold into humanity's lap. The ultimate generosity was designing the human being with the capacity to read the universe.
Giving us the hardware and the software of consciousness.
Exactly. We were given optic nerves to perceive the light, a prefrontal cortex to process the data, a rada, which is free will, to make moral choices based on that data. And because we are formed from Al-Akar, we possess the inherent capacity for love to meaningfully connect us to the whole system. The generosity isn't just an external gift, it is the actual architecture of the human being.
And to emphasize why this specific cognitive architecture is such a profound gift, the text contrasts human intellect with animal instinct, referencing the ancient story of Cain and Abel.
Oh, right, with the crow.
Yeah. After Cain commits the first murder, he is utterly lost. He doesn't know how to dispose of his brother's body. He literally has to sit and watch a crow scratch at the dirt to learn the mechanics of burial.
It's so humbling. The apex predator of the planet requires a bird to teach him basic sanitation.
Right. We are capable of learning raw data and physical mechanics from anywhere in nature. But the intellect granted by the most generous is what allows us to elevate that raw data. The crow can demonstrate how to move dirt, but only the human intellect can process the moral devastation of why the grave needs to be dug in the first place.
Wow.
The ability to synthesize data into wisdom to comprehend morality, grief, and consequence, that is the unparalleled gift of Ikra.
We have spent a long time in the philosophical clouds here, discussing the blinding light of the divine, the evolution of abstract thought, and the cognitive tools of consciousness. But what makes the source material so brilliant is that it doesn't leave us floating in abstraction.
Now it grounds it.
It takes this massive, infinite concept of Al-Akram and grounds it in something so mundane, so absolutely ordinary, that we ignore it dozens of times a day.
A simple glass of water.
Yes. The text uses water as a masterclass in applying the command of Ikra. It asks us to read the ridiculous, multi-layered chain of generosity required just to make a single drop of water exist and function.
It starts at the foundational atomic level. Water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen atom. The text asks us to apply abstract thought to this basic chemistry. Why exactly 2 hydrogen atoms? Because if you added a third, or removed one, the molecular geometry fails, the delicate balance of the universe is ruptured, and biological life becomes impossible. The precise, unwavering attraction between those specific atoms is not a random accident, it is a deliberate, mathematically perfect act of design.
And what makes that even stranger is the nature of the ingredients themselves. I mean, hydrogen is a highly flammable, explosive gas. Oxygen is the gas that fuels and accelerates combustion. You take 2 microscopic engines of fire, you bond them together, and the resulting compound is a liquid that extinguishes fire.
It's crazy.
That is literal chemical alchemy. It is a paradox written into the foundational building blocks of the planet.
And the generosity extends into the physical properties of the molecule too.
Yeah.
Water is one of the only substances on Earth that naturally and easily exists in 3 distinct states: solid, liquid, and gas within our planet's very narrow temperature range.
Which is so convenient for us.
It's a perfectly engineered delivery mechanism because it can evaporate into a gas, it can rise, form those Karashabu clouds we discussed earlier, travel thousands of miles inland against gravity, and then condense back into a liquid to fall exactly where ecosystems need it.
It is a fully automated global irrigation system running entirely on solar power and atmospheric pressure. It's wild. And the text points out another layer of infrastructure that we completely take for granted. When that water falls, we don't just survive by licking puddles off the ground. We rely on massive underground aquifers.
Right, the groundwater.
But how did those aquifers get there? The text argues that the violent, terrifying geological forces of earthquakes and shifting tectonic plates are actually tools of provision.
Wow, really?
Yeah. They crack the mountains and shatter the bedrock to create massive subterranean storage tanks, keeping the water safe from evaporation and contamination until we, drill down to find it.
It is an unbroken supply chain of miracles that we just summarize with the word nature and then promptly ignore.
We really do.
But the text actually pushes the analysis of water even further into the frontier of how matter interacts with consciousness. It references the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto.
Oh, the water crystal photography experiments. These always sound like science fiction, but the implications are just staggering.
They really are. So Dr. Emoto exposed glasses of water to various stimuli, spoken words, music, written text, and even just human intention. He then froze the water and photographed the resulting crystalline structures under a microscope.
Okay, and what happened?
The text notes the profound results. When exposed to positive, affirming words like thank you, love, or divine names like Allah, the water molecules form these breathtakingly complex, symmetrical, snowflake-like crystals.
That's amazing.
But conversely, when exposed to negativity, hate speech, or chaotic noise, the crystalline structure completely collapsed into jagged, ugly, degraded blobs.
Think about what that actually means for us. Human beings are roughly 2/3 water. The surface of the Earth is roughly 2/3 water. If the molecular structure of water is tangibly, physically sensitive to language and intent, then our own biological makeup is constantly reacting to our spiritual and emotional state.
Yes.
We are quite literally vibrating with the energy of the words we speak and the thoughts we harbor.
It completely dismantles the illusion that the physical and the spiritual are separate domains. They are intimately entwined mediums. The water inside your cells is reacting to the reality you create with your consciousness.
Which brings us perfectly back to the thought experiment we opened the show with and the historical story of Caliph Harun al-Rashid.
Right, the ruler.
Harun al-Rashid was one of the most powerful monarchs in human history. He ruled the Abbasid Caliphate at its absolute zenith, commanding a global empire stretching from modern-day Morocco all the way to India. He possessed unimaginable wealth, armies, influence, and the text recounts a moment where a wise advisor comes to the caliph and asks him our opening question. "O commander of the faithful, if you were stranded in a desert, dying of thirst, what would you give for a single glass of water?"
And the caliph, forced to confront the fragile reality of his own biology, answers honestly. He says, "I would give half of my entire empire."
Half the known world for 8 ounces of H2O.
Yeah.
But the advisor presses further. He asks a second, deeply uncomfortable question. All right, you drink the water, you are saved. But then your body malfunctions. You suffer urinary retention. You cannot pass the water out of your body. You are dying in agony of uremic poisoning. What would you give to be able to relieve yourself and pass that water?
And the caliph, recognizing the inescapable trap of biology, replies, "I would give the other half of my empire."
The advisor then delivers a realization that should shatter the ego of every powerful person on Earth. He says, "Then do not boast of an empire whose total absolute value is equal to a single glass of water and a functioning bladder."
It's such a brutal reality check.
All the gold vaults, all the military conquests, all the silken palaces, when weighed on the scales of fundamental reality, they're worth less than the automated biological processes that we ignore every single time we use the restroom.
This narrative forces the central question of the text. Do we recognize the layered, staggering generosity in the things we take for granted? Because the source redefines gratitude entirely.
How so?
True gratitude isn't just a polite social reflex like saying thank you after someone hands you a plate of food. True gratitude is an expansive architectural awareness. It is the conscious recognition of the atomic chemistry, the global water cycle, the violent geological storage, and the flawless biological engineering that allows your body to take a sip of water and actually utilize it.
And the text adds one final meta layer to that, which I love. Realizing that you have the intellectual capacity to be grateful, that your mind can process this entire chain of generosity is itself another gift.
The awareness of the gift is a gift.
It's just endless layers of absolute provision.
Right. And if the creator is the ultimate source of all these layered gifts, the logical next step is to examine the recipient. What is the highest state a human being can achieve in response to this? If political empires and material wealth are essentially illusions compared to a glass of water, what makes a human being genuinely valuable?
Right, what's the metric?
The text answers this by exploring the concept of human dignity, known as karamah.
Now, karamah is a heavy word. It's usually associated with honor or sainthood or miraculous abilities, but the text completely strips away the mythology and the folklore surrounding it. Right?
It really does.
Yeah.
It argues that the absolute greatest gift God can bestow upon a human being isn't immense wealth or political power or even genius. The greatest gift is the ability to give to others.
The capacity to become a conduit for Al-Akram.
Exactly. A person who sits on oceans of hoarded wealth, who cannot bring themselves to part with a single drop to ease the suffering of someone else, is, according to this philosophy, the most impoverished creature alive. They are a blocked pipe. They receive the flow of the universe, but they contribute absolutely nothing to it. True wealth is located entirely in the action of giving.
To establish the baseline of this human dignity, the text references a verse from the Quran. We have honored Karamah, the children of Adam. It recalls the moment of creation when the angels were commanded to bow to Adam.
Right.
And the text clarifies a really crucial theological distinction here. The angels did not bow to Adam's physical anatomy. They didn't bow to the carbon in the clay. They bowed to the breath of God within him.
The intellect.
Yes, the intellect to read the universe, the conscience to understand morality, the free will to choose, and the alaq, the inherent capacity for love. That immaterial architecture is the exclusive source of human honor.
Because that immaterial architecture is the source of our dignity, the text fiercely attacks popular misconceptions of what karamah actually looks like in practice. In many cultures and mystical traditions, karamah, often translated as miracles or signs of holiness, are basically assumed to be supernatural party tricks.
Yeah, people believe a holy person is someone who can levitate, swallow fire, read minds, walk on water, or predict the future. We want our saints to be esoteric superheroes who break the laws of physics.
We really do. But the text calls this out as blatant charlatanism and a complete misunderstanding of dignity. It points out the absurdity of this mindset. If flying through the air makes you holy, well then a common housefly is holier than you because it flies effortlessly by its very nature.
That's hilarious and so true.
If swimming underwater for hours makes you a saint, then a fish is the ultimate saint. These are merely physical feats, illusions, or parlor tricks. They have absolutely zero correlation with moral dignity.
So if breaking the laws of physics is just a sideshow, what actually constitutes a true miracle? What is the real definition of karamah?
True karamah, the highest, most astonishing miracle a human being can perform, is simply being fully morally human in a world that constantly incentivizes corruption. Wow. The text defines it using two concepts, taqwa and istiqamah. Taqwa is a state of hyper-awareness. It's a deep, mindful integrity that considers the Creator in every action and reaction.
Okay, and istiqamah?
Istiqamah is steadfastness. It is the grueling, unglamorous work of staying on the straight path, consistently doing the right thing, especially when it is difficult, when you are suffering, or when a lie would be much more profitable.
That reframes the entire concept of a miraculous life for you, the listener. You don't need to seek out supernatural gurus or look for people bending spoons with their minds. The universe itself is already breaking the laws of mathematical probability every single second, just to keep your heart beating and the water flowing. The real miracle, the true karamah, is moral uprightness.
Yeah.
To remain honest when everyone around you is lying and getting rich off it. To be generous when the culture tells you to hoard. To maintain kindness when you have every justification to be cruel. That resistance to moral entropy is the ultimate miracle.
The text illustrates this beautifully by analyzing the physical act of prostration in prayer. When a person lowers their forehead to the ground, they are just engaging in a physical stretching exercise.
Right.
Symbolically, you are taking your prefrontal cortex, the seat of your intellect, the center of your ego and your pride, and you are deliberately placing it lower than your heart. You are taking the immense, unparalleled gift of your human consciousness and physically returning it to the Creator in an act of absolute submissive gratitude.
That is such a stunning image. Subordinating the ego to the heart and offering both back to the source.
It's powerful.
It really is. But I want to explore one final, highly counterintuitive point the text makes regarding how this generosity, this Ikram, actually operates in our daily lives. Because let's be honest, life is not just a steady stream of open doors and abundant provision.
Definitely not.
The text argues that sometimes restriction is also a profound, deliberate act of divine generosity.
This is perhaps the hardest pill for the human ego to swallow because we are inherently short-sighted. We define generosity exclusively as addition. We think God is being generous only when he grants us unlimited wealth, perfect health, and basically everything our hearts desire.
Right, and conversely, we feel betrayed, we feel punished, and we feel abandoned when provision is restricted. Like when we lose a job, when a relationship ends, or when a door is forcefully slammed in our face.
We take it so personally. We assume the system has failed, or that the Creator is angry with us. We project our own transactional psychology onto the Creator. Yeah. But the text asks us to zoom out and consider the infinite wisdom of Al-Akram. An infinitely knowledgeable Creator understands the exact, specific carrying capacity of your individual soul. The Creator knows precisely how a sudden influx of wealth, a surge in political power, or the fulfillment of a specific desire might completely destroy your character, obliterate your peace of mind, or ruin your ultimate spiritual trajectory.
It's the analogy of a loving parent dealing with a teenager. If a 14-year-old begs for the keys to a Ferrari, the parent is going to say no.
Right.
The teenager will scream, cry, and accuse the parent of being cruel and ruining their life. But the parent is withholding the keys because they know the teenager lacks the capacity to handle a 600-horsepower machine. The restriction isn't a punishment, it is a life-saving intervention.
Exactly. Restricting a provision to preserve someone's character or their ultimate well-being is the ultimate act of uncalculated protective generosity. It requires recognizing that the universe is playing a much longer game than our immediate comfort. True trust, that Ramolmak, that yielding we discussed earlier, means looking at a closed door and recognizing the generosity, not just in what is given to you, but in what is deliberately, protectively withheld from you.
That completely reframes the narrative of our lives. Every failure, every missed opportunity, every painful restriction transforms from a punishment into a potential act of divine protection. It demands a level of trust that most of us spend a lifetime trying to cultivate.
It's a lifelong journey.
Well, we have covered a staggering amount of conceptual ground today. We started by confronting the blinding, overwhelming light of the divine, realizing that our limited biology requires the rope of the divine names, the Esmâ, to act as mirrors so we can safely perceive the artist through the art.
Yes.
We journeyed into the profound, unparalleled, non-transactional generosity of Al-Akram, a generosity that offers the absolute, shame-erasing forgiveness of Gaffer.
And we saw how that exact same generosity is woven into the very atomic fabric of reality. From the very first command to read and synthesize the disparate dots of the universe, all the way down to the flawless, mathematically improbable mechanics of a single glass of water that sustains our biology.
And we saw how this entire cosmic architecture culminates not in seeking out supernatural party tricks, but in the quiet, steadfast, daily miracle of human integrity, taqwa, and the realization that even the painful restrictions in our lives are acts of protective love.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. So I want to remind you, the listener, to reevaluate the miracles you walk past and ignore every single day. The simple fact that you possess the cognitive architecture to listen to this and connect these abstract concepts, the fact that you possess the free will to choose to forgive someone entirely without weaponizing their past against them, and the simple, profound fact that you can drink a glass of water and your body autonomously knows exactly what to do with it to keep you alive. These are all screaming, undeniable evidence of an absolute generosity that expects nothing in return but your own elevation.
The universe is a dense, layered text, and you have been given the unparalleled gift of the tools required to read it.
And to close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. A thought that brings these massive cosmic concepts right down into the privacy of your own mind.
I love this part.
If the sources tell us that we are made of the exact same water that Dr. Emoto demonstrated physically degrades or beautifies in reaction to the words we speak, and if true, divine generosity is defined by giving without keeping a ledger and forgiving without leaving a trace, how does the way you speak to yourself internally, physically alter your own fertile ground?
That's a profound question.
When you make a mistake, when you fail to live up to your own expectations, do you offer yourself that highest, most difficult tier of forgiveness, Gaffer? Do you erase the shame and allow yourself to start completely over? Or do you constantly scold yourself, keeping a meticulous ledger of your own flaws?
It really makes you think.
Based on the physics of everything we've discussed today, are you bringing rain to your own soul, or are you just a passing cloud?
We'll let you sit with that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Today's material is a theological exploration of the divine name, El-Ekrem, examining how infinite divine generosity manifests in physical creation, the first revelation, and human dignity. The material's ambitious conceptual scope occasionally obscures the central theological thesis of absolute divine generosity.
Yeah, that is exactly right. I mean, the depth of the linguistic knowledge on display throughout this text is just striking. It really is.
Oh, absolutely.
But, as we often see with this kind of highly specialized material, there's a huge risk of getting lost in the details. The core theme of El-Ekrem, this boundless, unprompted, infinite generosity of the divine, is incredibly profound.
Right.
Yet it sometimes just gets completely buried under the sheer weight of these deep linguistic tangents that the author introduces.
Yeah, and the section discussing the first revelation at Hira is like a perfect example of this. The material just shifts into this highly detailed analysis of the Arabic words Ikra and Alaq.
It really does go deep.
It breaks down Ikra, which is, traditionally translated simply as read, and completely redefines it as ejma, meaning to gather, to connect the dots of the universe, to synthesize information.
Right, and then the author tackles the word alaq, and in this context, it's often translated as a blood clot or an embryo, right?
Exactly, yeah.
But through classical root analysis, the text argues that it actually means love or deep attachment, which I have to say, the interpretation itself is just beautiful.
Oh, it's stunning.
The whole argument is that the first revelation is not just a command to recite text, but a command to read the interconnectedness of a universe that was created out of love.
It really forces the reader to completely rethink a foundational story. But looking at this structurally, we have to consider the cognitive load this places on the audience.
Right, the mental heavy lifting.
Exactly. For several long paragraphs, the listener is completely immersed in this, it feels like an etymological seminar. They are focused on Arabic root words, classical dictionaries, and all the complex mechanics of translation.
And during that deep dive, the thesis of divine generosity just fades entirely into the background.
It totally vanishes.
The audience is working so hard to understand the linguistic history of 7th century Arabic that they basically forget the primary subject. They lose sight of El-Kerim.
When a writer is building an argument with that much technical weight, it makes me think of a pearl necklace.
Okay, how so?
Well, the material as it stands is like you've been handed a collection of loose pearls. The pearls themselves, these individual insights into Ikra and Alaq, they are massive, they are flawless, and they are undeniably beautiful.
I like that.
But the string holding them together, the overarching theme of El-Kerim, it just becomes too thin. In some places, it's practically invisible.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
As a reader, you are left feeling like you are holding a handful of loose gems rather than admiring a unified, purposeful piece of jewelry.
You really do need that structural string to bear the weight of those heavy gems. And a practical way to thicken that string is to use El-Kerim as an explicit, recurring framing device.
Okay, what does that look like in practice?
Active structural framing means using the core concept to explicitly open and close each of these deep linguistic sub-narratives. Every single tangent a writer takes must explicitly answer a core question for the reader.
And that question is, how does this detail demonstrate God's generosity?
Exactly. How does this specific linguistic detail demonstrate God's ultimate generosity? It cannot just be an interesting historical fact. It must function as a proof of concept for the main thesis.
Right. So if I am the author looking at my draft right now, how do I actually execute that without sounding, repetitive?
That is the challenge, yeah.
How do I tether the analysis of Ikra as the act of gathering back to the string of the necklace naturally, without just pasting the word generosity at the very end of the paragraph?
Well, you reframe the conclusion of that specific linguistic point to focus on the human receiver. Instead of just wrapping up the etymology of ijma, you link it back to El-Ekrem by focusing on the human mind.
Oh, I see.
You argue that the human ability to comprehend this vastness, like the capacity to actually gather the universe in our minds and make sense of it, is God's greatest intellectual gift.
That's powerful.
Right? It's not just that God commanded humanity to read, it's that the ultimate generosity of El-Ekrem provided the hardware, the intellect, the logic, the perception required to do so in the first place. The command itself is simultaneously an immense gift.
Wow, yeah, that seamlessly bridges the gap between a dictionary definition and a sweeping theological concept. And I guess the author would apply that same structural rule to the exploration of Allah as love, right?
A logical necessity, or, a desire for subservient creatures, is the ultimate unprompted act of Kerim, of absolute generosity.
Yeah, that really ties it together.
If you bookend these etymological deep dives with those explicit theological conclusions, the reader never loses the thread. The tangents transform from distractions into the very pillars supporting the thesis.
And that framing device ensures the reader never forgets why they are reading about Arabic root words in the first place. It builds a bridge from the conceptual gifts of the mind to the physical gifts of the earth. Relying on the water consciousness experiment introduces a rhetorical vulnerability that could distract a discerning audience from a structurally brilliant argument.
Yeah, this is a major pivot in the text.
The text transitions into the physical world to prove the generosity of El-Ekrem, using water as the primary example, and initially it is just phenomenally well done.
The breakdown of how water is created is genuinely moving. The material points out that you take 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, framing that fundamental chemistry as an act of divine provision.
It's beautiful.
The miraculous nature of it is beautifully established.
But then, the text drops in a reference to a specific experiment by a Japanese scientist named Masaru Emoto.
Right, the water crystals.
Yeah, this is the widely known claim that water molecules react beautifully to positive words like Allah or love, forming these perfect symmetrical crystals, and that they break down into chaotic, ugly shapes when exposed to negative words.
Exactly.
Body is mostly water. The text implies that our physical makeup is literally shaped by our spiritual language.
And here is where the rhetorical vulnerability lies. Emoto's experiment is widely considered pseudoscientific.
Yeah, it's pretty heavily contested.
It has been extensively debunked by the broader scientific community for lacking methodological rigor, double-blind controls, and reproducibility. By including it, the author introduces a major weakness into a text that is otherwise attempting to present a robust, airtight theological argument about the natural world.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because we really need to dig into audience psychology.
Sure, go for it.
If the target audience for this material is already highly spiritually inclined, and they are coming to this text looking for theological insight rather than, peer-reviewed physics, does a slightly unscientific metaphor really matter?
I hear what you're saying, but
if the emotional resonance is strong, isn't that enough? The poetic image of water reacting to prayer is undeniably beautiful, and I can completely understand why an author would want to leverage that imagery to make the reader feel something profound.
It is beautiful, yes. But that is a fundamental tension in spiritual writing, balancing poetry with rigor. True intellectual rigor honors the listener's intelligence, regardless of their baseline spiritual inclination.
So you don't think they just gloss over it?
No, because its spiritually inclined audience still lives in the modern world. They are still exposed to scientific literacy. When a writer leans on debunked science, they inadvertently signal to the reader that their theology requires fragile, manufactured evidence to survive.
But wait, are you saying that theology shouldn't rely on the miraculous or the unseen? Because much of faith inherently operates outside the bounds of empirical science. Why does this specific scientific threshold matter so much if the overall goal is just to inspire awe?
It matters entirely because of the context the author has set. The author is using the physical, observable universe as proof of El-Ekrem. When you insert pseudoscience into that framework, it implies that the actual observable reality isn't miraculous enough on its own.
Ah, I see what you mean.
Critically thinking listeners will immediately flag that reference as flawed. And the danger of writing is that when one piece of evidence crumbles in the reader's mind, it casts a shadow of doubt over the rest of the argument.
Right. It's a domino effect.
Exactly. The audience starts to question the validity of everything else you've presented. You lose their trust for the sake of a cheap metaphor?
If the foundation has a crack, the whole cathedral looks unstable. But, taking out that water consciousness experiment leaves a gap in the emotional arc of that paragraph.
It does leave a gap, yeah.
If I am editing this piece, how do I prune the fragile pseudoscience but maintain that deep sense of wonder? Where should the author lean in to replace that lost momentum?
Yes. Look at the reality of it. You are combining 2 volatile, highly flammable gases, hydrogen and oxygen.
In isolation, they are literal agents of combustion.
Right, they explode.
But El-Kerim combines them to create the exact opposite. They form the very substance that extinguishes fire, regulates the planet's temperature, and sustains all biological life on Earth.
That framing turns a basic, dry high school chemistry fact into an indisputable theological proof. You don't have to invent a reaction to words because the reaction of the atoms themselves is the miracle.
Exactly. It is intellectually bulletproof. The author doesn't need the water memory experiment because the actual verifiable chemistry of water is already a profound demonstration of absolute generosity.
That's such a stronger angle.
And this approach applies to the geological elements mentioned in the text as well. The material touches on earthquakes, creating natural reservoirs to store water in mountains.
Right, but how does an author expand on geological facts without turning a spiritual manuscript into a geology textbook?
You filter the geology through the lens of intention. You frame the violent tectonic shifts of the Earth not as random destructive chaos, but as the geological preparation of a massive storage system for humanity's most vital resource.
Oh, framing the mountains as water towers?
Exactly. You describe the sheer scale of the mountains holding snowpack, acting as natural water towers that slowly release moisture in the spring, just when the valleys need it for agriculture. Expanding on these universally accepted facts keeps the sense of awe completely intact without inviting any skepticism.
So the writer maintains the high ground of intellectual credibility, while still delivering a massive spiritual impact. The miracle is already there in the mundane reality. The author's job is just to point the camera at it.
Perfectly said.
Showing how humans receive that physical generosity naturally brings us to how we are meant to reflect it back. The critique of performative miracles momentarily shifts the tone from transcendent awe to defensive polemics.
This was a really surprising part of the text for me.
Yeah, up until this point, the text maintains a highly elevated, contemplative, almost majestic tone, while exploring God's generosity, or Karam. But as it shifts to exploring human dignity, or karamet, the rhetoric takes a sharp, unexpected turn.
Well, the foundational insight in this section is incredibly strong. The text argues that true human karamet, true dignity, or what we might call a human miracle, is not about magic tricks or supernatural feats.
Right.
It defines human dignity as taqwa, which is piety, spiritual steadfastness, and holding the line in one's moral character. That is a profoundly grounding, mature theological insight. The problem arises entirely with how the author chooses to emphasize this point.
Because the author spends a significant amount of time mocking what they call performative miracles. They mention flying saints, call out Indian Buddhists swallowing fire, and criticize charlatans who claim to walk on water.
Yeah, it gets very specific.
The sudden pivot to mocking these groups creates a jarring tonal shift. It replaces the transcendent awe we've been sitting in with a defensive, combative energy.
It fundamentally lowers the register of the piece. When you spend paragraphs tearing down charlatans, you drag the reader out of the contemplative headspace you spent the entire text carefully building.
It's a bit like whiplash.
Totally. The reader goes from marveling at the atomic structure of water to listening to a rant about street magicians.
But again, I want to push back on this because tone is subjective and anger can be a very effective literary tool.
Sure, it can be.
Isn't there a risk that removing this polemic makes the material too abstract? Doesn't the frustration with charlatans, this anger at people who are actively cheapening the idea of a miracle, give the piece a necessary, urgent passion?
I see where you're going with this.
Sometimes an audience needs to know what the author is fiercely fighting against to fully grasp what they are fighting for. The contrast seems vital to making the argument stick.
Contrast is absolutely vital. You're right. We often learn what things are by understanding what they are not. The issue here isn't the presence of contrast, it's the delivery mechanism.
Okay, tell me more.
The suggestion is not to remove the friction, but to frame the definition of true dignity positively through an internal spiritual contrast rather than an external mockery of specific groups. The passion in the writing should come from elevating the ordinary, not from punching down at the absurd.
Why is punching down ineffective here, though?
Because when a piece of sophisticated theological writing resorts to mocking fire swallowers, it feels a bit cheap. It is an easy target. It distracts the reader from the profound beauty and difficulty of what taqwa actually is.
It makes the author sound petty.
Exactly. It makes the author sound annoyed rather than inspired.
So how do we rewrite that contrast without losing the rhetorical punch? If I am the author trying to show the reader that magic tricks are meaningless compared to moral integrity, what does that actually look like on the page? How do I write that contrast without resorting to mockery?
You start by utilizing a beautiful analogy that is already buried deep in the text. The author briefly mentions, a fly flies in the air, a fish swims in the water.
Oh yeah, I remember that line.
Bring that to the forefront. Use that specific imagery to explain that true human dignity isn't about mimicking animals. If defying gravity and flying was the highest form of dignity, the bird would be superior to the human.
That's a great point.
If breathing underwater was the ultimate miracle, the fish would be our spiritual master. You use that logic to demonstrate that seeking cheap parlor tricks is actually a demotion of human dignity, an attempt to become something lesser.
So you dismantle the desire for magic intellectually. You show the reader that the desire itself is fundamentally flawed, rather than just mocking the people who perform the tricks.
Exactly. Then you pivot to the human experience to bring in that urgent passion you were looking for earlier. You contrast the desire for flashy, immediate gratification, like walking on water, with the quiet, monumental struggle of an ordinary person.
Right, making it relatable.
You paint a vivid picture of someone who loses their wealth or faces unimaginable grief, and yet refuses to become bitter. They refuse to abandon their moral compass. You contrast the illusionist with the individual maintaining their spiritual integrity, their istiqamah, during severe, crushing hardship.
Wow. By illustrating someone holding onto their humanity when it would be infinitely easier to lose it, you generate a much deeper, more resonant kind of passion.
It creates an urgent, gripping tension that keeps the tone incredibly elevated. It turns the critique inward. It forces the reader to reflect on their own human condition, their own struggles, rather than inviting them to join in scolding others.
It reminds me of the pacing in a great novel. You don't need a villain doing something ridiculous to make the hero's quiet endurance compelling.
Exactly.
The endurance itself is the miracle. When you focus on the sheer willpower required to maintain moral steadfastness, the parlor tricks naturally look foolish by comparison. You don't even have to say they are foolish. The reader arrives at that conclusion on their own.
Allowing the reader to arrive at the conclusion themselves is always the mark of masterful writing. The grand architecture of the argument here is truly something to behold. And refining these structural and tonal elements will ensure the core message resonates powerfully from start to finish.
To quickly recap the main points of our critique today, this piece is a profound meditation on divine generosity that can easily be elevated from great to masterful. First, explicitly anchor the deep linguistic tangents back to the central theme of El-Ekrem, using it as a recurring structural framing device to ensure the overarching thesis is never lost and the cognitive load on the reader is managed. Like the chemical paradox of water or the geological preparation of the earth, rather than introducing the rhetorical vulnerability of pseudoscience.
Which we discussed in depth, yeah.
And finally, elevate the critique of performative miracles. Transform it from a defensive polemic into a positive, contemplative contrast that celebrates quiet spiritual steadfastness. We invite the listener to apply these structural and tonal adjustments and submit their revised work back in for another critique.
Welcome to the debate. When we talk about human dignity, we almost always treat it like a crown.
Right.
Like this crown that is just, placed on our heads the moment we are born. We think of it as this completely static, permanent inheritance, as if we are just born royalty in the universe, and we don't have to do a single thing to maintain or justify that status.
I mean, it is the ultimate assumption of privilege, really. If you are listening to this right now, chances are you've never actually questioned whether you have inherent worth. We just assume human honor is ours by default simply because we exist and breathe.
Yeah, exactly. But when you step into the philosophical framework of the source material we are exploring today, specifically looking through the lens of the divine name El-Ekrem,
which translates to the most generous.
Right, the most generous. When you look at that crown suddenly looks a lot less like finished jewelry. It starts to look Well, a lot more like a raw, unshaped block of marble. It demands carving. It requires actual sweat and effort. The material presents us with a really profound tension regarding human honor, or what the text calls karamah.
Yeah, and it forces us to ask a very difficult question. Is human honor a completely unearned, ontological gift given by an unconditionally generous creator? Or is it a conditional state, like something a human being has to actively actualize through intellectual effort and moral steadfastness?
When I look at this text, I see a clear demand for action. While the creator provides the initial capacity, true human honor, true karamah, has to be actively earned and activated. It is not a passive state.
But see,
wait, let me just lay this out. The material makes it clear that we achieve this through intellectual synthesis, gathering the pieces of the universe together, and through moral effort. The creator might plant the seeds, absolutely, but the human being has to water the field.
Right. But I read the exact same lines, and the sheer scale of the generosity described just overrides that framework for me. Because El-Ekrem represents uncalculated, boundless giving, I view human existence and human honor as entirely unearned gifts. They stem from pure, foundational divine love.
So you don't think effort matters at all?
Well, what you are calling human effort is, in my reading, just an illusion. It is this tiny construct we built to feel independent, but it sits entirely upon layers and layers of prior, unearned grace.
Okay, let's dig into that foundational concept of karamah then, because the source material fundamentally redefines it. It strips away this idea of a magical, passive gift that you possess just by having a pulse. The text uses a really vivid metaphor here, the mirror of the human heart. Yes, the light of divine generosity is constantly shining, but the human being has to actively angle their mirror to reflect that light.
I agree with the metaphor, but
if you choose to turn your back to the light, you cannot claim the honor of reflecting it. You know? You have to use the biology you were given to engage with the universe. You aren't handed a finished product. You are given raw materials and a profound responsibility.
But you just said it yourself. We are given the biology. We are given the mirror. We are given the light. This is where I think the focus on effort really diminishes the absolute infinite nature of El-Ekrem.
How so?
The text is explicit that existence itself does not exist because it's somehow earned the right to be here. Non-existence can't earn anything. Existence is a pure, unadulterated gift given to the void. God, being El-Ekrem, gives without calculation and without needing a return.
Well, sure. I agree that existence is a gift, but the nature of that existence implies responsibility.
Let me give you an example of just how deep this unearned gift goes, looking at the very word used for human creation in the text, alaq.
Okay.
Now, traditionally, in embryology, people translate this as a clinging blood clot in the womb. But the text relies on classical linguistics to completely reframe this.
Wait, how do we get from a physical clinging clot in a biological sense to something philosophical? What is the linguistic bridge there?
It is actually brilliant. The Arabic root of the word means to cling or to hang on to. Historically, yes, that describes the physical embryo attaching to the uterine wall. But in classical linguistics, when the heart clings to something, what is that?
Attachment?
It is attachment. It is love. The text redefines alaq not just as biology, but as profound, foundational love. Mahabbat. We were created out of a clinging love.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Therefore, human dignity isn't a transactional status where we put in X amount of effort to get Y amount of honor. It is a foundational reality born out of pure divine affection. To say we have to earn it fundamentally misunderstands the scale of a generosity that literally pulled us out of non-being purely out of love.
I see the beauty in that linguistic connection, absolutely. But if it is all just pure, passive love, how do you explain the explicit commands given to humanity?
Like what?
Let's look at the very first command the text highlights, Ikra. Usually, this is just translated as read, but the text points out a fascinating linguistic connection made by the philosopher Al-Jabri.
The ilma concept.
Yes, exactly. He defines Ikra not just as scanning words on a page, but as ilma, which means to gather, to connect, to synthesize the parts in order to see the whole.
Gathering the signs of the universe together.
Right. And that is not a passive state of receiving love. That requires rigorous intellectual effort. We are given the tools, the eyes to observe, the pen to record, the light to see, but we must actively connect those signs.
But again, the tools...
Just a second. Because if you don't put in the cognitive effort to gather the pieces and realize they point to a creator, you remain blind to the truth. The material brings up a really striking medical example to prove this point. It mentions a German railway worker who lost a significant portion of his frontal lobe in a severe accident.
Right. The text uses that to talk about the loss of human capacity.
Yes. After the accident, he didn't just lose his memory, he lost his ability to synthesize consequence and morality. He began living purely on immediate instinct, completely unable to perform that akma, that gathering of concepts to understand the future or the divine.
Because the physical tool was damaged.
Exactly. The reason the text brings this up is to show exactly how human honor works biologically. The physical tool, the frontal lobe, is there, but the highest form of humanity requires the active, functioning synthesis of information. Without the effort of the human mind actively connecting the dots, that potential just sits there dormant. You have to fire those synapses. You have to do the work.
Okay, I understand the mechanism you are describing, but I still think you are missing the forest for the trees here. You are focusing entirely on the effort of connecting the dots while completely ignoring where the dots, the paper, the pen, and the very synapses synthesizing them came from. Every single tool required for this supposed effort is a prior, unearned gift.
But having a tool isn't the same as using it.
True, but the material specifically addresses this kind of human arrogance. It points out that human beings will sometimes sit back and say, well, did I ask to be created? Did I ask for this responsibility?
People say that all the time.
Right. But think about the profound psychological irony of that moment. To even ask that question, the human being has to use the intellect God gifted them, the vocal cords God crafted for them, and the complex grammar God taught them, just to question the one who provided the apparatus. The very capacity to formulate the thought that I am making an effort is an unearned gift.
So you're saying the ground we stand on to claim our independence is actually owned by the Creator?
Exactly. Even that frontal lobe you mentioned, the fact that human beings possess this incredibly complex, energy-hungry neocortex that separates us from instinctual animals is a pure act of grace. The effort to gather information is completely subsumed by the overwhelming generosity of the tools provided to do the gathering.
I hear you.
You simply cannot claim merit for building a house when someone else gave you the land, the blueprints, the wood, the hammer, and the hands to swing it.
It is a powerful image, I'll give you that. But let's look at the psychological reality of human struggle. If everything is just a warm blanket of grace, it breeds a specific kind of laziness that the text explicitly condemns. It introduces a concept called manavi ranchalik.
Right, the desire for unearned spiritual income, spiritual free riding.
Precisely. If you're listening, you probably know people like this in the material world. People who want the wealth without the work. The text says humans do this spiritually too. They want to find a guru or a saint or someone else to carry their moral burdens so they can slip into heaven effortlessly. But the material uses a devastating historical example to completely crush this idea. The prophet's experience at the city of Taif.
That's a very heavy moment in the text.
It is agonizing. Here is a man who is the absolute pinnacle of human character, the most beloved by the Creator. And yet, he goes to Taif to share his message, and he is brutally rejected.
Violently?
Yes. He is chased out of the city, bleeding, exhausted, with walls in front of him and walls behind him, pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance. He prays, basically begging not to be left to his own devices for even a blink of an eye. Now think about the mechanics of this from a theological perspective.
Okay.
If anyone in human history deserved an effortless, unearned paradise, if anyone could have just coasted on pure grace, based on who he was, it would have been him.
Well, God could have just made the people of Taif listen.
Exactly. God could have instantly softened their hearts, but he didn't. He demanded that the prophet endure immense, agonizing effort. God required him to struggle, to bleed, to actively angle his heart's mirror through the pain to catch the divine light. If human honor was just an unearned gift, Taif makes no sense.
I see what you mean, but
Taif proves that true karamah is an active, demanding, sometimes painful process. It is the furthest thing from a passive reception of grace.
you bring up the pain of Taif, which is a profound example of emotional and physical vulnerability. But vulnerability is just a matter of perspective. If we want to talk about true human vulnerability, we have to look at the story of Harun al-Rashid, which the text places right alongside these concepts to dismantle the illusion of human merit.
The Abbasid Caliph.
Yes. Harun al-Rashid was a king whose empire stretched from the Caucasus to the Philippines. He effectively owned half the known world.
A very powerful man.
Right. So the text recounts a famous interaction where his advisor asks him, "My king, if you were dying of thirst in the middle of the desert, what would you give for a single glass of water?" The king answers honestly. He says, "I would give half my empire." Then the advisor asks, "Well, and if you drank that water but your body shut down and you couldn't excrete it, and you were dying of a ruptured bladder in agony, what would you give to be cured?"
Let me guess.
The king replies, "I would give the other half of my empire."
So his entire global kingdom is worth exactly one glass of water.
And the ability to pee it out. But the text doesn't stop there. It goes incredibly deep into the actual physical mechanics of that water to show what El-Kerim really means. It explains that even your supposed effort to just take a sip of water is built on infinite, invisible miracles.
You referring to the molecular breakdown the author does?
Yes. God had to engineer the exact magnetic attraction between 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. If it was 3 hydrogens, it wouldn't be water and we would die.
Right.
God had to give water the highly unique chemical property to exist as a solid, a liquid, and a gas at normal Earth temperatures so it could evaporate. He had to orchestrate global atmospheric cycles to push those clouds like guided missiles over specific land masses.
It's a lot of moving parts.
He uses tectonic plates and earthquakes to crack mountains so they can act as underground reservoirs. All of this planetary engineering just so a human being could eventually draw water from a stone.
It is a dizzying amount of prerequisites.
Exactly. When you look at the sheer, staggering scale of divine micromanagement required just to keep ourselves hydrated, the idea that our little moral struggles represent some independent merit just collapses. It collapses under the weight of this infinite, uncalculated giving, which the text calls Mahaza Ikram. We are floating in a boundless ocean of grace, arguing about who is swimming with the best form.
Okay, I see the poetry in that. I really do. But I have to push back because that line of reasoning risks pushing us straight into fatalism.
How do you mean?
If God does literally everything from the atmospheric pressure to the firing of our synapses, then nothing we do actually matters. We are just automatons. And the material explicitly guards against that by how it defines true miracles, or karamah.
Go on.
Well, it completely rejects the supernatural circus tricks that charlatans use to claim spiritual superiority. The text mocks things like a mystic sleeping on a bed of nails, flying into the sky, or pulling up a rope. It quotes an old saying. Basically, if you see a man flying in the air or walking on water, pay no attention. Flies fly in the air and fish swim in the water.
Right, so if flying isn't a miracle, what is the real miracle?
The text says true karamah is taqwa.
Moral steadfastness.
Right, taqwa. It is walking the straight path, observing ethical boundaries and aligning your life with divine law when you have the capacity to do otherwise. And that the text provides a fascinating modern analogy to explain how this human choice matters. It brings up the Japanese water crystal experiments.
Oh, where the water structure supposedly changes based on human intent?
Yes. The material points out that when water is exposed to a good word, to gratitude, it crystallizes into beautiful, symmetrical patterns. But when exposed to negativity or anger, the structure breaks down into chaos.
Interesting.
The author connects this back to us. Human beings are mostly made of water. We have that same sensitivity. God creates the potential for us to be responsive to his commands, absolutely. But we can still choose to be ungrateful. We can choose to be blind, deaf, and mute to the truth, causing our own internal structure to break down.
The ability to reject the gift.
Exactly. The text actually features a divine rebuke where God asks, "What have you done to yourself, O human? I created you to be a servant to the divine, and you went and became a servant to money, to status, to other people."
Yeah.
That rebuke only makes logical sense if the human being bears the active responsibility to maintain their honor. If God micromanages everything, the rebuke is meaningless. By identifying taqwa as the highest form of human honor, the material firmly grounds our dignity in our ethical conduct and our active choices. God planted the field, but you must water it with your taqwa to grow your paradise.
But let's look at what that taqwa, that moral steadfastness, actually looks like in practice, according to the text itself. Because even our ability to make those good choices is heavily curated by God. The material offers a highly nuanced and frankly comforting interpretation of divine withholding.
What do you mean by withholding? Like poverty?
Yeah. When people experience restriction, say they lose their job, they don't get the wealth they wanted, or they face an illness, they immediately cry out, "My Lord has abandoned me. He has humiliated me." We naturally view restriction as a punishment or a lack of generosity. But the text argues the exact opposite.
How so?
It says that this withholding is actually an act of supreme generosity. It is El-Ekrem in disguise.
Because giving too much might ruin the person's character?
Precisely. The text says God, as the creator of your psychology, knows exactly how you would behave if you are given limitless wealth or unchecked power. If giving you the world means you would become arrogant, lose your faith, and ultimately destroy your own soul, then restricting you is the ultimate act of grace.
So God is protecting you from your own potential for failure.
God is actively curating the parameters of your test. If your environment, your specific restrictions, and your blessings are all meticulously calibrated by God to keep you walking on the straight path, then how much of that resulting taqwa is really you? That moral steadfastness you are so proud of isn't really an independent human achievement. It is the ultimate manifestation of God's protective, uncalculated generosity. God is essentially placing guardrails on your life so you don't drive off the cliff. Even the divine rebuke you mentioned is just profound disappointment born of love, asking why we are doing injustice to the dignity we were freely given.
It is a beautiful way to frame hardship, I will admit that. So if we are to synthesize where we are both coming from today, for the listener trying to apply this to their own worldview, from my side of the debate, I argue that the source material profoundly elevates humanity, precisely because it respects us enough to place the responsibility of honor squarely on our shoulders.
Right.
It demands that we use our frontal lobes to gather the signs of the universe through Iqra. It demands that we maintain our moral steadfastness, our taqwa, rather than waiting for magical interventions or trying to free ride on someone else's spiritual coattails. True honor is the active, sometimes painful, realization of our potential.
And from my perspective, while the material certainly encourages righteous living and making good choices, its overarching, inescapable thesis is the absolute reality of El-Ekrem. A generosity so deep, so foundational that it redefined a biological blood clot into pure love and engineered the molecular structure of the universe just to give you a sip of water.
Yeah.
We are enveloped in a grace so total that even the intellect and the freedom we use to claim our independence are gifts from the very source we are trying to be independent from. Every moment of steadfastness is fundamentally an unearned gift.
What I find most compelling about this framework, regardless of which side you lean toward, is how perfectly it dismantles the two greatest psychological traps of the human ego.
Arrogance and despair.
Exactly. On one hand, it completely destroys arrogance. If you're listening to this and you've achieved great things, this text asks you to pause. When you realize the dizzying cascade of prerequisites required just for you to exist, down to the gravitational pull between atoms and the functioning of your synapses, you can never again look at your wealth, your intellect, or even your moral purity and say, I earned this all by myself.
You can't claim you built the mountain you're just standing on. And on the flip side, it completely dismantles despair. Because if you understand that even restriction, even the deepest hardships and closed doors are meticulously curated acts of protective generosity from a creator who loves you fundamentally, well, then you never truly feel abandoned.
Right.
You realize that the closed door is just as much a gift of El-Ekrem as the open one. God is just protecting you from a room you weren't ready to enter.
It really challenges us to constantly analyze our own lives through this dual lens. Are we taking these immense cosmic gifts for granted and failing to do the carving required of us? Or are we arrogantly believing our carving is what created the marble in the first place?
It leaves us with a lot to explore within our own lived experiences, doesn't it? We have to constantly balance that gratitude with that responsibility.
We do. And perhaps that brings us right back to where we started today. That raw block of marble representing the potential for human dignity. Whether you believe the tools to carve it are purely a manifestation of protective, unearned grace, or that the agonizing act of carving itself is the necessary condition for your honor, the marble is still sitting there in front of us, waiting to reveal what is inside.
The light is shining. It's up to us to see what our mirror reflects.
This is the brief on the Islamic concept of El-Ekrem. This material is based on a theological lecture by Mustafa İslamoğlu, exploring how absolute divine generosity actually shapes the universe and defines true human dignity. First, let's dive into El-Ekrem, which means the most generous. You know, human generosity is pretty limited. We almost always expect something in return, and honestly, our giving is kind of like sharing a pie we've already baked. Divine generosity, on the other hand, creates out of absolutely nothing. It's literally inventing the universe's raw ingredients, like bonding hydrogen and oxygen to create life-giving water right out of thin air. Second, this boundless generosity naturally sparked human creation. The lecture points out that the Quranic word alaq, which we often just view as a biological embryo, fundamentally means love or attachment. Think about it. If the Creator is the ultimate giver, wouldn't the very act of our existence be the ultimate expression of love, rather than just a cold biological process? Finally, we have to look at how we reflect that honor in our daily lives through karamah, or true dignity. Real dignity isn't about performing crazy supernatural miracles like flying or walking on water. Instead, it's found in taqwa, which basically means steadfastness, piety, and living a righteous life. Because let's be real, true magic isn't levitating. After all, flies fly and fish swim. True magic is simply using your free will to stay on the straight path. Ultimately, true dignity isn't found in performing flashy miracles, but in recognizing we were created out of love and actively choosing to live a righteous life. This is the brief on the Islamic concept of divine generosity. So today we're breaking down the divine name El-Ekrem, the most generous, to show you how unconditional giving literally built the universe and defines true human nobility. First, think about human generosity. It's almost always calculated, right? We kind of expect a return, some praise, or we just don't want to look bad. God's generosity, however, is absolute and totally unmeasured. Seriously, how can anyone actually earn the right to be created before they even exist? You can't. God's ultimate, unconditional gift is simply granting existence to pure nothingness. Second, let's look at the actual physics of this generosity. Take water, for instance. God generously takes two highly flammable, incredibly dangerous gases, hydrogen and oxygen, and binds them with a specific magnetic attraction to create a life-giving water molecule. So what does this all mean? Well, that simple glass of water isn't just basic chemistry. It's a perfectly engineered, multi-layered miracle designed entirely for our survival. Finally, we're meant to respond to this generosity by embodying true nobility, known as karamah. Now, people wrongly equate spiritual holiness with supernatural parlor tricks, like flying or walking on water. But the lecture pushes back on this. Flies fly in the air and fish swim in the water. So doing those things doesn't make you holy at all. True nobility is simply found in righteousness, or taqwa, and staying on a straight moral path. Ultimately, divine generosity isn't just about the physical gifts we are given, but how we use them to build a life of grounded moral integrity. Because the greatest miracle isn't breaking the laws of physics, it's holding on to your humanity. This is the brief on the Islamic concept of divine generosity. So today we're breaking down the divine name El-Ekrem, the most generous, to show you how unconditional giving literally built the universe and defines true human nobility. First, think about human generosity. It's almost always calculated, right? We kind of expect a return, some praise, or we just don't want to look bad. God's generosity, however, is absolute and totally unmeasured. Seriously, how can anyone actually earn the right to be created before they even exist? You can't. God's ultimate, unconditional gift is simply granting existence to pure nothingness. Second, let's look at the actual physics of this generosity. Take water, for instance. God generously takes two highly flammable, incredibly dangerous gases, hydrogen and oxygen, and binds them with a specific magnetic attraction to create a life-giving water molecule. So what does this all mean? Well, that simple glass of water isn't just basic chemistry. It's a perfectly engineered, multi-layered miracle designed entirely for our survival. Finally, we're meant to respond to this generosity by embodying true nobility, known as karamah. Now, people wrongly equate spiritual holiness with supernatural parlor tricks, like flying or walking on water. But the lecture pushes back on this. Flies fly in the air and fish swim in the water. So doing those things doesn't make you holy at all. True nobility is simply found in righteousness, or taqwa, and staying on a straight moral path. Ultimately, divine generosity isn't just about the physical gifts we are given, but how we use them to build a life of grounded moral integrity. Because the greatest miracle isn't breaking the laws of physics, it's holding on to your humanity.
This is the brief on the Islamic concept of El-Ekrem. This episode distills a fascinating lecture by scholar Mustafa İslamoğlu about the profound divine name El-Ekrem, or the most generous, revealing how it literally shapes both the universe and our human dignity. First, let's look at the nature of absolute generosity. When we're generous, it's kind of like a transaction. Right? We subconsciously expect a thank you or maybe a return favor down the line. But divine generosity is totally different. It's this one-way, no strings attached fountain of existence, creating reality out of pure nothingness while expecting absolutely nothing back. Second, we can actually see tangible proof of this generosity everywhere, especially in water. Think about it. Two volatile gases perfectly combining into a life-giving liquid brilliantly engineered to evaporate, travel via clouds, and store itself safely in mountain springs. So imagine a thought experiment based on the incredibly wealthy Caliph Harun al-Rashid. If you were dying of thirst in the desert, wouldn't you trade your entire empire for just a single glass of water? It perfectly proves that our greatest treasures are completely unearned, cosmic gifts. Finally, realizing our existence as a gift forces us to totally redefine karamah, or human dignity. We are inherently honored with intellect and consciousness. Now, people often obsess about translating karamah as some kind of supernatural magic, but let's push back on that. A bird flying isn't a miracle. The real miracle, true karamah, is actually taqwa, a human being actively choosing to use their intellect to live an upright, righteous, and morally grounded life. Absolute generosity gives us the universe for free, and true human dignity is simply having the moral integrity to honor it. This is the brief on the divine name El-Ekrem. Today, we're diving into a fascinating lecture by Mustafa İslamoğlu, exploring this name meaning the most generous and how it completely redefines our understanding of miracles and human dignity. First, we've got to look at the absolute nature of El-Ekrem's generosity. You know, human charity is kind of like re-gifting what we already have, but divine grace, it's literally inventing the gift itself out of the void. Think about water for a second. You take two explosive gases, hydrogen and oxygen, and combine them to create a life-giving element. Now that is boundless, uncounted giving. Second, to actually wrap our heads around this immense grace, we were equipped with the ultimate tool, the human intellect. The first Quranic command, Iqra, or read, doesn't just mean staring at a text. Its root actually points to ajima, which means to gather and connect. It's the active process of connecting the scattered pieces of the universe to see the creator behind them. So here's a challenge for you. When you look at the universe, are you genuinely connecting the dots to see the maker? Or are you just staring blankly at the pointing finger instead of looking at the moon it points to? Finally, this brings us to redefining keramet, or true spiritual honor. We usually associate this with supernatural parlor tricks like flying or walking on water. But real honor? It's simply maintaining taqwa, just living a steadfast, righteous human life. And here's a wild twist. Sometimes the ultimate act of grace isn't giving. Sometimes withholding wealth or success is actually the greatest gift if it protects your soul. Ultimately, true human dignity isn't found in performing magic tricks, but in using our intellect to recognize and honor the boundless generosity of the Creator.